It was supposed to be an ordinary evening at Westwood Plaza, a bustling shopping center in the heart of the city. Families stroll between stores, couples share quiet dinners, and the hum of everyday life filled the air. But at precisely 7:42 p.m., everything changed. The security footage later reviewed by detectives captured the moment in chilling detail. A young man, later identified as Ethan Lewis, stepped into the atrium of the plaza. His posture was relaxed, his face expressionless. He walked with purpose, yet there was no sign of agitation or hesitation. He stopped near the large central fountain, reached into his coat, and pulled out a Glock 19. Without warning, without a single word, he raised the weapon and fired 3 times. The bullets tore through the air, striking a woman who had been standing by the fountain, checking her phone. Lena Collins, a 32-year-old marketing executive, collapsed instantly, blood pooling around her as screams erupted through the plaza. Panic set in. People ran, ducked for cover, knocking over tables and chairs in the chaos. Ethan didn't move. He didn't run, didn't attempt to fire again. He simply lowered his gun, staring straight ahead as if he had just completed a task and was awaiting further instruction. By the time the first responding officers arrived, Ethan had placed his gun on the ground and raised his hands, complied with their orders without protest. His face remained blank, devoid of fear or remorse. As he was forced to the ground and handcuffed, the only words he uttered were a chilling whisper. "I finished my task." Detective Nathaniel Cross arrived at the Westwood Plaza crime scene within the hour. By then, the area was in complete lockdown. Blue and red police lights flashed against the glass storefronts, and forensic teams were already at work, documenting the scene. The body had been covered, but the pool of blood remained, a dark stain on the pristine marble floor. Cross was a seasoned investigator, known for his meticulous attention to detail and relentless pursuit of the truth. He had seen his share of homicides, but something about this case felt off. He approached Sergeant Henry Wilkes, who was speaking with a shaken security guard. Wilkes turned at the sight of Cross and exhaled sharply. "This one's strange, Cross. No struggle, no shouting, no motive we can see. Guy just walked in, shot her, and gave up without a fight." Cross furrowed his brow. Any connection between them? Did he know the victim? Wilkes shook his head. "Not that we can tell. They never interacted before tonight. Witnesses say she didn't even notice him until it was too late." Cross turned his gaze toward the police vehicle where Ethan was being held. The young man sat in the back seat, his hands cuffed in his lap, his eyes staring straight ahead, not nervous, not angry, just vacant. Rachel Moore, the forensic psychologist assigned to the precinct, walked up beside Cross, flipping through the initial witness reports. "You see his expression? That's not guilt, not panic. That's detachment, like he wasn't even present in his own actions." Cross nodded slowly. He didn't run, didn't resist. And that phrase, "I finished my task," sound more like a programmed response than a conscious admission of guilt. Rachel frowned. "Programmed? You think he was coerced?" "Maybe," Cross said, "or something worse." Ethan was transferred to Central Precinct for interrogation, where he sat across from Cross in a cold, gray room. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly above, casting shadows that seemed to deepen the hollowness in Ethan's eyes. Cross leaned forward. "Ethan, do you know why you're here?" Ethan blinked once. "I completed my task." Cross exchanged a glance with Rachel, who sat beside him, taking notes. "What task?" "Who told you to do it?" Silence. "Ethan." Rachel tried, her voice softer. "Do you remember pulling the trigger? Do you remember seeing the woman?" Ethan hesitated, as if searching his own mind for an answer. Finally, he murmured, "I remember walking into the plaza. I remember hearing water. Then my vision blurred. There was noise, and then it was over." Cross narrowed his eyes. You don't remember firing the gun? No. Rachel studied him closely. Ethan, do you recognize this woman? She slid a photo of Lena Collins across the table. Ethan looked at it, and for the first time, something flickered in his eyes. Not recognition, but confusion. I've never seen her before, he admitted. Why would I hurt her? Rachel turned back to Cross, lowering her voice. If he's faking amnesia, he's an incredible actor. Cross exhaled, sitting back. Or someone made him forget. They still didn't have a motive, but Cross was certain of one thing. Ethan Lewis wasn't acting alone. Someone had orchestrated this. And whoever they weren't finished yet. Detective Nathaniel Cross leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Ethan Lewis. The interrogation room was silent, except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. Rachel Moore sat beside him, her notepad filled with scribbled notes and psychological observations. Ethan, on the other hand, remained eerily calm. His posture was relaxed, his gaze unfocused. He didn't fidget, didn't show any of the usual signs of stress or deception. To anyone who didn't know better, he looked like an ordinary man sitting in a waiting room rather than a murder suspect in a high-profile case. Cross flipped open the case file, his fingers drumming against a metal table. Ethan, let's try this again. You told us you completed your task. I need to know who gave you that task. Ethan blinked once, his expression unchanging. I don't know. That's not an answer I can work with. Ethan exhaled softly. I remember getting ready for work. I remember locking my apartment. I remember walking down the street. Then, Rachel leaned in. Then what? Ethan hesitated. A flicker of something crossed his face, something close to fear, or maybe confusion. It's like my thoughts aren't my own. I know what happened because I saw the security footage, but it doesn't feel like me. It's like watching a dream I don't remember having. Cross glanced at Rachel, who was studying Ethan with clinical interest. She finally spoke. Ethan, have you ever undergone any psychological treatment? Therapy? Hypnosis? Ethan frowned. No. Well, Rachel tilted her head. Well, there was something, he admitted. A few months ago, I was having trouble sleeping. I kept waking up at odd hours, feeling wrong. My co-worker recommended a place, a clinic that specializes in sleep therapy. Cross's instincts flared. What clinic? Ethan hesitated, then said, Elysium Mind Center. Rachel scribbled furiously in her notepad. Cross leaned forward, his voice even. Ethan, what do they do to you? Just relaxation techniques, guided meditation, some audio therapy. It helped for a while. Ethan rubbed his temples. But then I started blacking out. Just small moments at first, a few seconds lost here and there. I figured it was stress, or maybe I just needed more rest. Then one day, I woke up and 3 hours were gone. I checked my phone, and there were calls I didn't remember making, emails I didn't remember sending. Cross exchanged a look with Rachel. This was something bigger than just a random shooting. Rachel's voice was careful. Ethan, did they ever ask you to repeat phrases? Perform exercises that seemed strange? He shook his head, then stopped. Wait, there was something. One of their techniques. It was called cognitive reinforcement. They'd have me listen to recordings while I slept. Soft voices, repeated phrases. They said it was supposed to help with deep relaxation and memory retention. Cross's jaw tightened. And you never thought to question what they were making you listen to? Ethan's eyes darkened slightly. I did, but when I tried to remember the exact words, I couldn't. A chill ran down Cross's spine. Rachel tapped her pen against her notebook. Nathaniel, we need to get into that clinic. Cross stood, closing the file. Ethan, we're going to look into this. Until then, you're staying in custody. Ethan nodded, as if he expected no less. I just want to know the truth, he murmured. Cross turned to Rachel as they left the room. Find out everything you can about Elysium Mind Center. If they're implanting suggestions into their patients, then Ethan isn't just a suspect, he's a victim. Rachel's expression hardened. And if they've done this to others, this won't be the last time someone kills without knowing why. Cross exhaled slowly. Someone had found a way to hijack the human mind. And if they didn't stop it now, more innocent people would turn into unwitting murderers. Detective Nathaniel Cross pulled his car to a stop outside the Elysium Mind Center, a modern glass-fronted building nestled between upscale boutiques and cafes. The clinic had the appearance of legitimacy. Minimalist signage, clean architecture, a calming aesthetic meant to reassure anxious patients. But Cross had seen too many polished facades hiding right underneath. Rachel Moore checked her notes beside him. According to their website, Elysium specializes in deep relaxation therapy, cognitive enhancement, and behavioral modification. Sounds harmless enough, but if Ethan's story is true, we're dealing with something far more sinister. Cross nodded. Let's see what they have to say. Inside, the clinic was a picture of serenity. Soft instrumental music played in the background, and the air was laced with a faint scent of lavender. A receptionist, a young woman with neatly pinned auburn hair and a warm but artificial smile, greeted them. Welcome to Elysium Mind Center. How can we help you today? Cross flashed his badge. Detective Nathaniel Cross, NYPD. This is Dr. Rachel Moore, forensic psychologist. We need to speak with someone regarding a former patient of yours, Ethan Lewis. The receptionist's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she recovered. I'll see if Dr. Caldwell is available. Please have a seat. Cross and Rachel exchanged a glance before taking a seat in the waiting area. The room was tastefully decorated with nature photography and motivational quotes framed in sleek silver. Your mind is your greatest asset. Control it, and you control the world. Rachel scoffed under her breath. That's ominous. A few minutes later, a man in his early 50s stepped into the room, his tailored suit impeccably pressed. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, and wire-rimmed glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. Detectives, he greeted smoothly. I'm Dr. Marcus Caldwell, director of Elysium. How can I assist you? They followed him into his office, a sleek, sterile space devoid of any personal touches. Cross took a seat, his eyes scanning the room. No family photos. No clutter. Everything meticulously placed. Rachel leaned forward. We're investigating an incident involving one of your former patients, Ethan Lewis. He mentioned receiving treatment here. We need details on what that entailed. Caldwell's expression remained polite but guarded. I'm afraid I can't disclose patient records without a warrant. Confidentiality is paramount in our field. Cross leaned back, arms crossed. Ethan murdered a woman 2 nights ago. He claims he has no memory of it. He also claims your clinic provided therapy that involved behavioral reinforcement. Now, we can go through legal channels, but that would take time. If you have nothing to hide, why not help us out? Caldwell steepled his fingers, regarding them carefully. Elysium offers a variety of treatments aimed at improving cognitive function and behavioral patterns. Some of our methods include guided meditation, neurofeedback, and cognitive reinforcement. These are all standard evidence-based practices. Rachel pressed. Ethan described experiencing blackouts, missing hours of his life. That's not standard, is it? A flicker of something crossed Caldwell's face. Dissociation can occur in patients undergoing intensive therapy, particularly if they're dealing with unresolved trauma. But we never encourage amnesia or any kind of memory loss. That would be highly unethical. Cross narrowed his eyes. Yet he remembers listening to recordings while he slept. Recordings he now can't recall the contents of. Caldwell's polite mask didn't slip, but his tone grew firmer. Detectives, I understand your concerns, but I assure you our methods are legitimate. If you'd like, I can provide a list of general treatment protocols, but I cannot discuss individual cases without the proper legal documentation. Rachel sighed. Then we'll get that warrant. Cross stood. One last question. Has anyone else reported symptoms like Ethan's? Caldwell hesitated. Not that I'm aware of. But if I recall any relevant information, I'll be sure to contact your department. Cross didn't believe that for a second. As they stepped out of the office and back into the fresh air, Rachel exhaled sharply. He's hiding something. No doubt about it, Cross muttered. We need to find out what. Rachel checked her phone. I might have a lead. I pulled patient records from a few sources. Anyone who checked into the ER in the last year reporting unexplained memory loss, sudden violent outbursts, or dissociative episodes. I found another name, David Langley. He was a patient at Elysium 6 months ago. Where is he now? Rachel's face darkened. He's dead. Apparent suicide. Cross felt the weight of the case settle even heavier on his shoulders. We need to talk to his family. If Elysium is covering something up, we're running out of time to stop it. Detective Nathaniel Cross parked his car outside the modest suburban home of David Langley's parents. The single-story house, with its neatly trimmed lawn and faded blue shutters, seemed an unlikely place to hold the answers to a potential mind control conspiracy. Yet, David Langley had been a patient at Elysium Mind Center 6 months before his apparent suicide, and Cross was beginning to suspect that death wasn't as straightforward as it seemed. Rachel Moore adjusted her coat against the brisk autumn air. Suicide might just be the surface explanation. If Elysium implanted something in these patients' minds, there's a chance David wasn't acting under his own free will when he died. Cross exhaled. Let's find out. They knocked on the door, and after a moment, an older woman opened it. Her eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, and she studied them warily. Yes. Mrs. Langley? Cross asked gently. I'm Detective Cross. This is Dr. Rachel Moore. We're investigating your son's case, and we're hoping to ask you a few questions. Her lips pressed together tightly. David's case? But the police already ruled it as. We believe there may be more to the story, Rachel interjected. If you'd be willing to talk, we'd appreciate any insight. After a long pause, Mrs. Langley stepped aside. Come in. Inside, the house smelled faintly of old books and lavender. Framed photos lined the walls. David as a young boy, David at graduation, David with what looked like his younger sister. He was a good kid, Mrs. Langley said, leading them to the living room. Bright, thoughtful, he had ambitions. But then something changed. Cross leaned forward. Change how? She swallowed hard. After he started therapy at that clinic, Elysium, he became different. Not just withdrawn, but like he wasn't himself anymore. He'd forget conversations we just had. He stopped laughing, stopped caring about things he used to love. I remember one time I asked him what was wrong, and he looked at me like he didn't even recognize me. Then he said, "The thoughts aren't mine." Rachel and Cross exchanged a glance. Mrs. Langley's hands trembled as she pulled something from the coffee table. A journal. He kept this after he started treatment. Maybe it'll help. Rachel flipped through the pages. The first few entries were normal, mundane thoughts, daily reflections. Then the handwriting changed, erratic, disjointed, sentences repeating. They are shaping me. I don't remember the sessions. They are reinforcing control. They are watching. I must comply. Rachel's stomach tightened. This isn't just therapy. This is conditioning. Cross turned to Mrs. Langley. Did David say anything the night he died? Tears welled in her eyes. He was afraid. He kept saying, "They won't let me go. They won't let me think for myself." Then, just hours later, her voice broke. He was found in his car. Overdose. The police said it was intentional, but I knew my son. He wasn't suicidal. Cross's jaw clenched. If Elysium manipulated his mind, they may have made him believe he had no choice. Rachel set the journal down. If they could do this to David, and Ethan was one of their patients too, then Elysium might be creating programmable individuals. People they can manipulate into doing anything. Cross stood. Then we need to find out exactly how they're doing it before someone else dies. Detective Nathaniel Cross gripped the steering wheel as he and Rachel Moore sped toward the city records office. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, but they still needed concrete proof of Elysium Mind Center's illegal activities. If they could link the center to more cases like Ethan Lewis and David Langley, they would have enough to request a full-scale investigation. Rachel tapped on her laptop, scrolling through databases of past Elysium patients. I ran a background check on Elysium's board members. Most of them have spotless public records, but one name stood out, Dr. Marcus Caldwell. Cross frowned. The director we spoke to? Rachel nodded. He used to work on experimental cognitive therapy programs in private research. Most of his work is classified, but there's a reference to him being associated with a government-funded behavioral modification project 5 years ago. The project was shut down after allegations of unethical human testing. Cross's grip tightened on the wheel. And now he's running a mind center where patients experience memory loss, behavioral changes, and suicidal tendencies? Doesn't sound like a coincidence. They arrived at the records office and flashed their badges to gain access. The clerk, an older man with thick glasses, led them to the archives room, where boxes of legal documents and permits were stacked against the walls. Elysium opened 3 years ago, Rachel murmured as she flipped through files. They acquired the property under a shell company, standard practice for hiding financial trails. But what's more interesting is this. She pulled out a file labeled Patient Complaints. Cross skimmed through it. Multiple reports from former patients described eerily similar symptoms: lost time, confusion, personality shifts. Some even mentioned waking up in places they didn't remember traveling to. None of these cases had ever been followed up. Rachel turned to another section. And here, 3 patients who filed complaints mysteriously disappeared shortly after. No bodies, no traces. Just gone. Cross exhaled. We need to move fast. If Elysium is erasing people who become liabilities, Ethan might not be safe in custody for long. They left the records office and headed straight for the precinct. When they arrived, however, Cross's got twisted. The holding cell where Ethan Lewis had been kept was empty. Where the hell is my suspect? Cross barked at the officer on duty. The officer, clearly rattled, stammered. There was an order for his transfer. Higher-up said he was being moved to a secure psychiatric facility. The paperwork checked out. Cross's blood ran cold. Who signed the order? The officer handed over the form. The signature at the bottom read, Dr. Marcus Caldwell. Rachel sucked in a sharp breath. They got to him. Cross's mind raced. We have to assume they won't let him live long enough to talk. Where did they take him? Rachel checked the file. St. Vincent's Psychiatric Hospital. If he's there, we have to move now. Cross didn't hesitate. He pulled out his phone and called an emergency extraction request while they ran for the car. Ethan wasn't just a pawn in this game. He was living evidence. And if they didn't get to him first, Elysium would make sure he never spoke another word. The tires screeched against the pavement as Detective Nathaniel Cross floored the accelerator, weaving through the late-night traffic towards St. Vincent's Psychiatric Hospital. Rachel Moore sat beside him, her fingers gripping the dashboard, her face tense with urgency. If they've taken Ethan, it's not to help him. she said. "They're going to erase him." Cross's jaw tightened. "Not if we get there first." The hospital loomed in the distance, a massive brick structure with barred windows, meant to house the city's most disturbed patients. But Ethan wasn't one of them. He was a witness, a victim, and if they didn't act fast, he'd be another disappearance on the growing list tied to Elysium Mind Center. They pulled into the parking lot, flashing their badges at the security guard before pushing through the main doors. The lobby was quiet, almost unnervingly so, but Cross could sense something was off. The receptionist barely looked up when he demanded to see Ethan Lewis, muttering something about restricted access. Rachel leaned in. "We don't have time for bureaucracy. If he's here under Caldwell's orders, we need to get to him now." Cross didn't wait for permission. He stormed past the desk, heading straight for the patient wing, Rachel right behind him. The fluorescent-lit hallways smelled of antiseptic, the walls lined with reinforced doors. They found room 312, Ethan's assigned room, and Cross reached for the handle. It was locked. Rachel pounded on the door. "Ethan, are you in there?" A muffled groan came from the other side. Cross stepped back, then kicked the door hard. The frame splintered as the lock gave way, and they rushed inside. Ethan was strapped to a gurney, his wrists and ankles bound with thick restraints. His pupils were dilated, his expression dazed, and an 4-line was attached to his arm, dripping a clear sedative into his bloodstream. Rachel cursed and ripped the 4 out, shaking Ethan's shoulders. "Ethan, can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered. They said I needed treatment, but I don't remember." Cross looked around the room. "We need to get him out of here. Now." Rachel started undoing the restraints when the door swung open behind them. Dr. Marcus Caldwell stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 orderlies in white coats, but their stiff postures and expressionless faces reminded Cross of something else. "You're making a mistake, Detective," Caldwell said smoothly. "Ethan is here for his own safety." Cross's gun was in his hand before Caldwell could finish the sentence. "Cut the act. We know what you've been doing at Elysium. We have the patient complaints, the missing persons reports, the proof. You're not getting away with this." Caldwell sighed, shaking his head. "You're thinking too small, Detective. You assume this is just about one clinic, one experiment. But what we're doing, it's bigger than that. Imagine a world where people can be corrected, where violent criminals, unstable individuals, dissenters, can be reprogrammed to serve society rather than disrupt it." Rachel's voice was cold. "You're brainwashing innocent people." "We're refining them," Caldwell countered. "Ethan is unstable. He's a prime example of someone who needed guidance. Look at what he did." Ethan, still groggy, managed a weak protest. I didn't want to." Cross tightened his grip on his gun. "You programmed him to kill someone, then wiped his memory of it. And now you want to wipe him out completely. I'm done listening." One of the orderlies lunged. Cross fired, one shot to the knee, and the man went down. The other orderly hesitated just long enough for Rachel to shove him backward, sending him crashing against a supply cart. Caldwell turned to run, but Cross caught him by the collar, slamming him against the wall. "Where are the others?" "The ones who disappeared." Caldwell's calm facade finally cracked. "You think you've won? You think this ends with me? You have no idea who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Cross growled. "And now, so does the world." Behind him, Rachel had already called for backup. Sirens blared outside as officers stormed into the hospital. Within minutes, Caldwell and his remaining staff were arrested, and Ethan was placed under protective custody. As they watched the officers take Caldwell away, Rachel exhaled. "It's over." Cross shook his head. "No, it's just beginning." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He pulled out his phone and showed her a new report, an unnamed research facility in another state, run by former colleagues of Caldwell's, with nearly identical therapy programs. Cross looked at her grimly. Elysium was just one branch. The real problem is how deep this goes. Rachel's expression hardened. Then we keep digging. As they walked out of the hospital, the weight of the case settled over them. They had won this round, but the fight against invisible hands manipulating the human mind was far from over, and somewhere in the shadows, someone was already preparing to take Caldwell's place.